Hi, it's been a while since I've done a video clip, so I'm excited to be back, and I'm beginning a new series today. We're going to start looking at angles of the chart. Today we're going to look at the Ascendant and Descendant, and we're going to begin to look at how these conversations are formed between the trans-Neptunians, the asteroids, the planets, and how these particular points on a chart can really sum up and give us some great information and detail about what's going on. So first of all, I just want to have a little visual aid here. And I'm going to talk about what we're going to look at. So what I have here is an empty wheel, okay? And this empty wheel, we see the cross. The lines are darker up and down, and then we see a horizon line that goes straight across. Today, we're going to work with the line going straight across, okay? So when you're looking at a chart, the very beginning of the chart, let me make sure we can see that, is the ascendant of a chart. The opposite angle on that chart is the descendant. So we have an ascendant, and we have a descendant. So make sure I get this right, okay? So we start with our ascendant, and that is our outer personality, what we present to the world. If you're doing solar or lunar returns, it can also be your tools for the year. So it's how we cope. It's the tools that give us the skills to get through our daily life and how we present that to the world. But the other side of that coin is then our relationships, our one-on-one partnerships, our one-on-one interactions. So this is then the descendant. Now, it's been said somewhere that the people around us will often reflect our own issues. So that is very true. And you can actually see that and read that through astrology. So let's get started on this little project that I'm working with. First of all, I want to say that when you study astrology and you don't have a really good time to work with, say you're doing some natal work, maybe for yourself, but maybe for a family member, and there's not an accurate birth time, you can still do solar and lunar returns working with that chart. So even though you may not have an exact ascendant or an exact midheaven, you have all the other details of the chart. And when you begin to start adding in those solar returns or those lunar returns, they actually still work. So it's quite amazing. And it's interesting because in doing that form of predictive work, which I do a lot of, and I have to again say that that's been a real cornerstone of my business, is doing a lot of solar returns and a lot of lunar returns for people and kind of counseling them through situations, if you will. All I really need to work with most of the time, for 90% of the work that I'm doing, is the angle. Everything that's on the angle is telling me everything I need to know and everything I need to relay back to the client. You can actually get a wonderful and accurate story just by using the angles of the chart. So with that said, we're going to begin today using the ascendant, as I mentioned, and the descendant, as we did our little preview. So we're going to be looking at this from the perspective of a person who works with asteroids or trans-Neptunian is working with a lot of material. So when you look at these angles, sometimes there's a lot of information on one or more of these angles, and you can get quite a detailed story. So I want to start off with the fact that I have a couple of examples, wonderful examples, of how the ascendant is what we look like, or the presentation that we're presenting to the world. I have two gentlemen that I've known in my life. One is a very close friend and client. The other was more of an associate back in the day, but they both had or have Adamitas at the ascendant. They both are very bigger than life in many ways. They are both very formidable when they need to be. They both can dig their heels in. There's a real element of being firm or stubborn, if you will, with this energy, but there's a sense of persistence and perseverance here as well. In the case, one man one of these two men, actually worked with stone. And Adamitas, as we know it, is stone. It's landscaping. He did actually work outside. And the other one that I know does a lot of landscaping type work. So it's really interesting. It's landscaping. It's boulders, rocks. It's the barren areas in particular. It's the energy itself is obstacles and delays. These are people that dig their heels in. So there's a lot of correlation here, even in terms of what they look like. So I always love that because they're such perfect examples. In one case, the man and I are close enough that I know for a fact he's a resistor pattern. So that means that he resists. But I have a theory because the other gentleman, whom I was never able to test that way, so I'm not certain, but he also seemed very dig your heels in, if you will, which means he could also be a resistor pattern, and there could be something to that, that if you had Adamitas at the Ascendant, it would make you more of a resistor pattern. So somebody else, okay, another one of these gentlemen actually, has Chiron also at the Ascendant, and I thought it was really interesting when I see that. I also have it, but it means that we meet a lot of people through metaphysics, which we do. It also means that we're teachers. We are. So Chiron is, people always say they don't follow the rules. That's true, I think, in some respect, but not from the way you might be thinking. They're not traditional people. And the interesting thing is, if this is at your Ascendant, it means that the people in your life are not traditional. And that is also true for both of us. So I can actually say that is even true for myself. Moving on, I'd like to point out that when you're looking at the Ascendant and all that falls there, you're also looking at, in a lunar return or a solar return, you're looking at the tools that are going to help you through that month, that year. I'm going to give you some examples. I had a client with Hilidago. So that means that she was having trouble speaking out and that she was really unable to speak out. Well, it was a situation where there was no point in speaking out. Would it have made things easier? Probably not. It would have made things worse. So my feeling, here we go, it was a coping mechanism, okay? The same thing with lie. You know, I want to use lie as a descendant factor because I've actually seen that with clients, and it does mean watch who you're dealing with, watch what they're saying, because they may not be telling you the truth, but not all lying is done with bad intention. Just realize that, and I can get into that deeper in a minute when I get back to the Descendant. But understand that when we have something at the Ascendant, like Orpheus, for example, well, you're going to cry a lot. Something sad is going on, some form of grieving, some loss, some seriousness of a situation. Libitina will do the same thing, will cause this crying, and the tool that is being used for that year is crying. Okay, so then just kind of moving on here with my notes, when you're dealing with the Descendant, so let's just go there. Let me step back a minute. Let's talk about Saturn for a minute, okay? It's really interesting because I've seen this everywhere, okay? I've been doing this a long time. And I stopped because I just saw it in my notes, and I really want to point this out because Saturn is incredible. If you have Saturn on the Ascendant for your lunar or your solar in particular, you're going to have a year where you might feel that you have more responsibility. You might be dealing more with separation. You might have to organize more. And I'm going to be honest with you, you don't feel like you look good. Okay? People with Saturn on the Ascendant always feel and act tired, worn out. They have issues there. Okay? Now, Saturn on the Descendant could also be coming from the 6th, which means that not only, could that whole issue with the responsibilities also be still true, but now the person doesn't feel good. Okay, so Saturn in the 6th, and believe it or not, you could have both, because with the reflection that goes on is also you put the natal chart on top of it. So your angles change every year, so if you put the natal chart on top of it, you really get to see where it's happening. And it is interesting to see how that Saturn can really affect a person in their appearance And it could be a year where you just look old. So the next year you have all this, wow, you look great, wow, you know, because maybe Jupiter's there, Uranus is there, and all of a sudden you look different. Saturn is also a tool, and meaning that if it were on your ascendant, you want to be organized, you want to be disciplined, you want to use a little wisdom, maturity. These things are necessary because it makes that year a little bit more palatable. By the same token, let's jump to that descendant since I keep doing that anyway. Saturn on the descendant is talking about separations, but it can also be an indication of more mature and stable partnerships. In the 6th house, they might be coming in from work. In the 7th house, like because you're taking that degrees on both sides of that angle. From the 7th house, it might deal with partners, friendships, or people that are closer to you. It can also be commitments. So that can work both ways in the same year. It can work one way. So I like to always say it means everything it can. And if we're talking about a lunar return, it might be more one way. But if you're talking about a solar return, look to see that work in every way that it can. So the descendant is our partners. It's that reflection that people shine back at us. And our reaction to it or how it affects us, that's into play. So you're going to an event, okay? Now, this event might be a job interview. I've done a lot of those. Okay, not job interviews, charts of. And Chronos is a huge one to show up on an interview chart. For your own credibility, but also many times now you're dealing with authority. Now, if you're having an HR interview, that might be Chronos at the midheaven or Chronos at the ascendant. But if you have a Chronos at the descendant, you might be dealing with that individual. It could also be dealing with a doctor if there's a health asteroid involved. So Chronos is telling us who we're dealing with, okay? Now, in an event, it can also be the reaction of the Chronos, so the credibility factor, they're looking at your credibility, you're wondering about their credibility. So Chronos is a big factor. Timing can also be playing in those factors, and timing is also a Chronos domain, okay, if you will. So from there, it speaks, when you're speaking about the descendant, you're talking about the influence that those people have on you, okay? In the case of the Chronos, you want to be seen as credible. The rest of the chart and putting it all together, you might get a really good picture of how this could go. Oh, I've done it. It's awesome, okay? Now, I've used other examples. An example I want to use here of a natal chart, for example. Okay, we've got a Pluto and Virgo on the 7th. Okay, so you think right away manipulation, power plays. This person could have some pretty heavy people in their lives. Actually, I can honestly say no to that. No, I'm not going to say they're not completely influenced by their relationships with others, and that literally going from one relationship to another can literally be a part of the redefining of this person's life. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that power plays and manipulation are always bad, because not all manipulation is bad. Think about the student teacher, and there you have manipulation, but that's not a bad. So Pluto being here speaks a lot about relationships that have strong influence, strong impact on the individual. But guess what? So does that person have a strong impact on their people as well. Okay, so because it works together. Okay, they always work together, or they wanted that in their life. That was a part of their own redefinition of themselves. Okay, in this particular case, the Ascendant Midheaven midpoint, and I know I did a web clip on midpoints. I can get, I believe that one might even be there. I don't know that I didn't use any examples though, but this particular situation, this person is a teacher of things that help transform people. So that's actually very telling, that the person could be actually pretty good at it. So, and that Pluto in that 7th house, that kind of reactive situation means that person probably had good teachers. That's why they can be that good of a teacher. Just an example. So in any story, the Descendant and the Ascendant conversations can be incredibly enlightening. Okay, I really just want to say that. So let's look at the word lie. I had mentioned lie earlier, and I'm going to talk a little bit about lie. Lie is something that I've been really following a lot lately in my lunar and solar work. So I'm working with clients, and I'll say to them, okay, you got lie at the Descendant. And I know I mentioned this. Then you really want to be really careful about lie at the Descendant, okay? Because that means you're not getting the truth. But here are some other examples. Neptune, Mercury. They're also telling us that you could be, in the case of Mercury, you could be tricked or fooled. You could be lied to in the case of Mercury, just because the person might be younger. That's another example, but they might also be a trickster. Neptune, you want to think they're artists, but they could be deceptive. They could be deluded. There could be dealings with alcoholism, okay? So Neptune, there's a reason why, but you're not getting the full picture there either. So these are things that when they come into play, you really want to look at them, and then you want to start reading all the other things that it's talking about, because you want to figure out, where is this coming from, so that you can be, as one of my clients often says, forewarned and forearmed. Okay? And that is one of the reasons why people do the work, have the work done that they get done. So the last thing I want to look at here is the Descendant with regards to event charts. Okay? Now, if you walk into a crime scene, you see the crime scene. So what does the Descendant represent? Okay? Well, oftentimes it can sometimes represent the, how did I put it? How other people are going to react to the situation, or how they're reacting. So the victims, perhaps. You might see a lot more about the victim between the Ascendant and the Descendant, okay? You might see something about the perpetrator, because remember that the Descendant is a reflection of. So you've got your Ascendant and you've got your Descendant. I have to say that most of my work has not been crime. I'm not saying I haven't dabbled or looked at it. I belong to a crime group, but with that said, I'm more likely to look at this in terms of business. I've done a lot of corporations and business work. And oftentimes the business as an entity itself, even the contract between the person working for them and then the business itself, well, the 7th house here again could relate to their customers. It could relate to their partnerships. It could relate to the reactions of the partnerships and how it all works together. But it's, when you look at the Descendant, you want to think about the interaction. That's just one little tip. So with that said, I want to make sure I've gone through everything here, and just say that I'm really enjoying doing these, and I really hope that you're enjoying watching them. And in the interim, if you'd like more information, I have my site at www.divinationcounselingservice.org. Divination's very easy. It spells exactly as it sounds. And with that said, I will bid you adieu. Take care, and until next time.